Welcome to the curious, the investor, the speculator, and the degenerate. I'm the Boss Hog, otherwise known as Liam, and today in our first educational content, we're taking a look at fire. But before that, an important message. The Boss Hog backs hedgehogs, and other animals because they are all awesome, but I do love hedgehogs. As such, from this video, I'm going to be announcing another commitment, that for every like on any video I get, I'll be making a 1 penny donation to St. Tiggy Winkles, which is a really big, started as a hedgehog charity, but now sees over 12,000 animal rescues a year. And if you think this sounds familiar, yes, I did nick the idea from Felix Finance, but I think it's a great idea. And just to show you that the Boss Hog loves hedgehogs, this is actually a picture of my domesticated African pygmy hedgehog called Euclid. He's 4 years old in this picture and he's awesome. He doesn't need rescuing, but plenty of other animals do. And as such, moving forward from this month, we'll be donating £10 or 10%, whichever is greater in terms of the likes on my videos. So another reason to like my content. Thanks very much, and on to fire. Okay, so firstly, what is fire? For anyone who doesn't know, literally stands for financial independence, retire early, FIRE. It sounds pretty easy, to be honest, but actually this is one of the first concepts I came across when I started exploring saving and investments, and immediately it appealed. I mean, why wouldn't it? The idea of being independent definitely appeals to my character. Retiring early, what's not to love? And I think COVID and everything else has just made a lot of people, myself included, just feel like maybe they can't always rely on institutions in place, especially if we have the foresight and the planning to do so. There are a couple of misconceptions about fire, though, that I do think it's worth addressing. It's not necessarily about retiring early. I mean, for some people it is. You know, they want to get out of work as soon as possible. They hate it. It's a chore. And as long as they don't starve, they're absolutely for retiring early. And that for them is their independent. It's more about having the option to do that, though, and really at the core of fire is about freedom. It's about having the freedom to be able to do what you want to do with your life. And that could be retiring early, but it could mean just having enough money put aside to do side hustles or do passion projects, or just work when you want to. It really frees up a lot of stress and worry. And in a way, it reminds me a lot of universal basic income, except from in this way, rather than relying on a centralized pool of money, you're basically creating it yourself. And again, this really appeals to me and my independent character. For some people, it does mean skimping on almost everything. I mean, you can see YouTube videos where people will wash all sorts of things. Eat moldy bananas is a good one as well. But really living incredibly frugally, maybe slightly disgustingly in my opinion, but I'm trying not to judge. But so let's stick with incredibly frugally and really just retiring as soon as possible. Whilst for others, it's about investing and creating a large nest egg and really retiring well. One of the things we're going to be looking at in this presentation is the different types of fire that actually exist. But there are a few things that all the different types of fire share, and really it's about making smart savings and investment decisions to meet your goals. I think that's a nice thing that all advocates of fire can agree on, no matter what type of fire they're going for. All types of fire do typically involve delaying gratification. That is a theme even outside of fire. Any sort of investment relies on you foregoing gratification today for more of it in the future, and I think fire is exactly the same. It does typically involve being smart with spending. The phrase I keep hearing a lot is it's not complicated, it's just not easy. And by that, it's actually fairly easy to get your mind around this stuff, but it's actually quite hard to delay gratification, right? We work hard, we earn, we want to go out and spend it, but it's not easy to not do that, basically. So need to be mindful, and again, it does typically involve being disciplined. That means different things to different people, I appreciate, but there is always an element of discipline at the heart of fire when it comes to saving and investing, and really understanding where you are financially. Okay, so types of fire. depending on where you read, there's anywhere between 3 and 5 different types of fire. I've put all 5 here. There definitely are some similarities in a couple of them, and I'll touch on them as we go through. The traditional fire is really just having enough income generating assets to cover lifestyle costs. It's not really attempting to make too many lifestyle changes. It's very similar really to what you imagine traditional financial planning to be. You're just making sure that you have an additional income stream that will cover what you want to do currently. Very simple. Some people don't even include traditional fire, but I thought this is the starting point, and it's most similar to traditional types of investment, to be perfectly honest with you. Fat fire. I mean, this sounds quite cool. I've heard it called fire on steroids as well. Is quite a common definition of it, but it's basically being able to retire without altering your living standards, and often more than that, it involves retiring really well, potentially living beyond what you had when you were working. Again, we spoke about delayed gratification beforehand. Fat fire can involve a standard of living in excess of what you enjoyed when you were delaying that gratification. It usually does require the most aggressive saving and investments. Just by nature, you need to build lots to survive and have that great standard of living, or alternatively it will require a longer time horizon. So again, very few people, unless they're extremely fortunate, will be in a position to have a fat fire at 30. Maybe some, I'm sure, but typically you're talking about a multi-decade project with a fat fire, and often a combination of the two, right? You're having to save hard, you're having to invest hard, and that may well be investing in yourself or your career or a business. It requires long-term investments. When I had a look at a Reddit page called Fat Fire, typically you're looking at retiring on 2 times the average income in your country, depending on where you are. That can be sort of 90 to 110,000 in America. In the UK, you're looking at about 60 to 70,000 pounds a year. So it's you know, a decent income, and again, depending on the tax situation of your investments, that can feel like a lot more. So the fat fire here, definitely a generous way to retire. Lean fire, so this is almost the exact opposite of fat fire, to be honest with you. It's being able to retire whilst meeting your necessary expenses. So this is really looking at your costs, getting rid of anything unnecessary. It's often associated with being frugal, minimalist, and basically reducing unnecessary spend. Typically here, according to the Reddit page Lean Fire, you're looking at a half to 2/3 of average income according to that Reddit. So again, somewhere around the 60% mark here of what would be a typical salary in your country, and projecting that forward. Barista fire. So again, before I was really knew much about fire, I thought barista fire would be most like lean fire, where you're almost looking to survive life as though you were earning like a barista, but no, it's not that at all. It's kind of just one of those jobs that people think of when they imagine part-time work, I suppose, or being able to pick your hours, similar to working behind a bar, those kind of things as well. I worked in a cafeteria when I was at college and uni. Nothing wrong with it, of course, and this is really talking about a gap between not being fat, not being lean, but being somewhere in the middle. And I suppose it's closest to being lean most typically, but it involves you continuing to work in some way to supplement your income. It can be quite varied. It was quite difficult for me to kind of get numbers because everyone has a different idea of what this means. For some people, being a barista, inverted commas, just means working for charity or doing things that they're particularly passionate about. For other people, it can be actually having a pretty well-paying job and really just using income to supplement their investments, and sort of do a mix and match. So that's an interesting one as well. And Fat Fire, Lean, and Barista, they were the original 3 basically, and then Traditional got added at the front end, and Coast got added at the back end. Again, a lot of people, when they speak about fire, will profess to not knowing this one existed before they looked into it. I will also share that as well. I'd never heard of Coast Fire before, but it's fairly similar to Barista. Some people claim it shouldn't be separate. I actually think it should be, to be honest with you, just because of the emphasis of how you invest. And really, it focuses on starting your investment really young, working super hard, picking up all the hours you can, and building an investment pot that, because of the nature of compounding, you've just put into an investment fund and let it sit there for a few decades until you're reaching your retirement age effectively, and depending on the amount saved or invested and the amount of time passed, actually a few tens of thousands can turn into over $1 million. We'll look at some examples in a second, but yeah, after that you then coast. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't hate the work I do, but I can imagine if you just want to be a free spirit or just do what you want, or maybe be a barista, then that could work for you. Like, there's nothing wrong with it at all. And again, I think all types of fire have a theme, which is you plan, you understand where you want to get to, and then you make it happen. And in that way, it's kind of quite motivating, really, as a movement. At least I found it motivating. So when we think about calculating what we need to retire, one of the nice things about fire is there's a very simple rule, and it's the 4% rule. You may well have come across it before, but it basically says that as long as you're not taking out more than 4% of your underlying capital, your money will more or less last forever. And this has been done looking at long-term trends in stock markets and all those other things, and basically, for a very long period of time, it will keep you going. Some people suggest you should have 3% to be slightly more risk adverse, but we're going to use 4%. I personally think 4% is a fine number. So if I think about costs, and I mean, these costs are arbitrary, I've just picked them for nice round numbers. If your annual costs are 40,000, in order to work out how much investment you need, you just need to times it by 25. And this is just a bit of maths, basically, because your withdrawal rate should be 4%. 4 times 25 gives us 100% of what we need. So we take our current cost being 40,000, we times it by 25, which is the inverse of 4%, and that gives us an investment needed of £1 million. So if you wanted to retire, Fire says that you need £1 million if your expected annual costs are going to be 40,000. So this is a fairly traditional way of calculating. For a fat fire, now your annual costs here are 100,000, but you could have only been spending maybe 50,000, maybe even less when you were saving for your fat fire. But you're looking forward to what you're going to be spending in your retirement. That's the important thing, right? It's no longer about what you were spending when you were working. It's about what you expect to spend, so what you need to have invested. So very similar equation here. We've got £100,000 need, so we're just going to times that by 25, and in this case we'd need 2.5 million. We've got our lean fire as well. So here I've just assumed an annual cost of 25,000. This is taking the middle ground basically between a half and 2/3 that were recommended from the Reddit thread. So this is 60% of our hypothetical £40,000. And here we're just doing again exactly the same thing. We're taking £25,000 annual cost, multiplying it by 25, and here this gives us our investment need of 625,000. So great, all good. And barista fire is slightly more complicated. Here I'm assuming we're back to our 40,000. We want to have a nice normal retirement, retiring early. But here this time we don't need £1 million invested, right? Because with the traditional fire we're putting our feet up and we're no longer working. With barista fire we're going to be supplementing it potentially with some salary. So again, here I've just picked some arbitrary numbers, but I'm assuming a 50-50 split between investment income and salary. So in this case we're basically taking 40,000, timesing it and getting our 500,000, 500,000 there, so half as much as what we need, and we're supplementing the rest with our salary basically. So in a way you're taking £20,000 outside of the salary, timesing it by 25, that gives us our 500,000. And then we move on to our coast fire, and I think here's some interesting numbers. So here we still assume that we need £40,000 costs, but this time, depending on when we start, depends on how much we're going to have when we retire. And I've taken a retirement age of 60, could be 65, 55, 70, it doesn't really matter, you can work this out yourself. But if you wanted to retire at 60, actually you could if you had £105,000 at 30, you could put it into a 8% yielding investment trust, and by the time you were 60, so 30 years later, you would have £1 million. So you could do whatever you like into 30 years before you get there. And when you come to retire at 60, you would have £1 million, and 4% of that would be 40,000 a year. Really goes to show you the power of compounding. And if that doesn't, then I think these two will. If you were 21 and you somehow managed to get your hands on £50,000 that you were able to invest, this is more or less 40 years, right? 39 years. You would only need £50,000 to turn that into 1 million. Again, just the power of compounding here really coming through. And even more extreme, obviously you won't be doing it, but if some nice person was to give you £10,000 at your birth, 60 years later, that would have turned into £1 million. Just 10,000, 60 years turns into that, and it really does show you the power of time in the market. Personally, when I was running those numbers, I just found it incredible, really. I just almost wanted to start giving everyone £10,000 at birth so that they could retire as a millionaire. I'm not quite sure what the economic impact of that would be, but kind of exciting to imagine anyway. And again, just the true power of compounding doing its stuff. So here, you've sort of got the templates here of what you really need to work out, what you need to retire on, and depending on the type of FIRE you need, what your actual costs are. You can take your costs, your expected costs in retirement, multiply that by 25, and that's going to tell you what your investments need to be at. That's all there is to it. Okay, and now bringing it back home to me. So again, when I started looking at FIRE, me and my wife, we had a pretty great time in our 20s. We earned hard, we worked hard, and we spent pretty hard as well. We did save, but we didn't really invest. We enjoyed our 20s, no doubt. But now it's time to start thinking for the future. And really, when we think about the future, we're wanting a fat FIRE. We're quite happy to work a little bit longer to make that happen. But we're going to spend hopefully a couple of decades in retirement, and we want to enjoy those decades. Basically, we want to kind of go back to what life was like in our 20s. Just going out many nights, having a beautiful drink, beautiful food, going to see shows in London, really making the most of one of the best cities in the world. So we're targeting a fat FIRE. We are being quite aggressive in that. And if we look at our actual expenses at the moment, we have necessary expenses of 41,000 a year. And these expenses aren't expected to stop for decades. I mean, you're talking sort of mortgages, nursery / school fee / university fee, council tax, just sort of state taxes, etc. Things that you can't get away from. So that works out £41,000 a year for us. We've got optional expenses of 4k a year. I don't think most of them are too outrageous, to be honest. You've got things like mobile phone contracts, Netflix, Spotify. If we were maybe targeting the lean FIRE, these are the sort of things that maybe you consider ditching. Spotify is what, £10 a month, so it's £120 a year, and you extrapolate that up in terms of savings / investments. But I don't think this is too outrageous. It's only 10% of our necessary expenses, and I think that ratio actually is better than I was expecting. We'll see. I only started really measuring expenses from January this year, so it could just be that in the short term that's what I'm seeing. But as long as it continues, I'm really happy with that. And then there is also, we're currently repaying £12,000 a year at the moment, which was to help us get our foot on the property ladder. That does stop in the middle of 2023. So once that is paid back, it'll free up some options as well in terms of spending. But really, our underlying expenses come in at 45,000. So thinking forward of what we need to do, we could just take that 45,000 and times it by 25. But actually, when you're calculating FIRE, depending on which resource you use, you hear anything from sort of 0% to 50% in terms of a margin of safety. You are talking about decades into the future. Things change, especially for me and my wife. This is a 2-decade project effectively. A lot of things can happen during that time, and probably will. So when I'm thinking about it, I'm looking at a margin of safety of 40%. So I'm actually assuming we're going to really need at least 63,000. So that's going to be our target. And here it's a very similar equation to what we were doing on the last slide. So 63,000 times 25 basically, and that's telling me that we need to have invested 1.575 million, so a little bit over 1.5 million. A big number for sure, but actually I've already done my aims and looked at my forecast, and therefore I'm actually quite happy with that, because our investment target is 2.5 million. So, and if I think about that in terms of income, this is also important as well. It's all very well having an investment fund, but you need to make sure you can get at it. It gives you a reliable stream of income and all those other good things. So once you have worked out what your investment is, you need to start looking in terms of income. So for us, and in the UK, we have private pensions. They're very similar, I think, to Roth IRAs. Extremely tax beneficial. The government gives you your tax back, so you don't pay any tax on your earnings if you put it into your private pension. And many employers will do a match up to about 5%. That's personally what I have as well. So I pay in 4%. The government puts on top of that another 1%, so 25% on top of mine. And then my employer basically doubles it. So it's super cost effective to do that. The only problem is we can't get it out until we're 55 currently, but actually changing to 57 if you're taking it out after 2028. So there is some limitations if you're putting it into pensions. Renting out homes. So currently, if I have a look on property websites for our London flat, it's a 2-bed, 2-bath on a couple of lines into Central. Currently a little bit over 20,000, so I've projected this forward to go up to 25. I don't really know what the property market's going to be like in 20 years' time. It just doesn't feel too unreasonable, to be honest. It may be slightly too high, it may be slightly too low, but I'm thinking that's probably about right in terms of renting out our home. Our ISAs and I guess shares more generally. Most of our shares will be tax protected and in ISAs. Really the difference between private pension and ISAs is when you pay tax. So because with a private pension you don't pay any tax at the beginning, you do pay income tax when you use your pension. But with ISAs it's basically the other way around. So you're investing your take home, your earnings, so the government's already taken their income tax. But any dividends and capital growth doesn't get taxed. So, and this for us is really the fallback for our retirement. We can get at it whenever we want. So if we're targeting 55, it becomes available before other pensions do, and it's tax free as well. So again, that 107,000 feels more like 160 in terms of its buying power in today's money. This is a middle range. So what this does is it assumes my wife and I can save, I think it's £48,000 a year for the next 20 years. So definitely a significant capital injection for a long period of time. And then it assumes 8% growth. So again, long-term average. If it's more than that, because we're talking about 2 decades, it will fundamentally improve our situation. If it's worse than that, it will fundamentally make it worse. So, I mean, I'm sort of predicting anywhere between 60,000 and 160,000, but 107,000 there feels the most realistic. And then we've got state pensions as well. These don't currently kick in until we're 67 and 68, but they are about £9,100 per person per year. So again, that will be great. State pensions are still taxed like income. So if you've got a state pension and a private pension, for example, and other sources that aren't in an ISA, like renting out a home, this will all incur income tax and the equivalent of. So, I mean, this is a really great looking income, obviously, of 181,000 or an estimated 142,000 after tax. Super happy with this. My only real concern about it is whether we can keep up the capital requirements needed to get to this level, and also whether the long-term performance of the stock market continues to be about 8%. Again, because we're looking at 2 decades time, if it's 6%, for example, it does have quite a significant change. If it's 10%, it also has a significant change in our favor. So again, I think 8% is a reasonable long-term return. It's what we're going for, and this is super encouraging. Obviously, we've sort of targeted here 63,000 based on our current expenses. We are hoping, my wife and I, to have a great retirement, a fat fire, as it were, and that's what we're really looking at. I hope you found this informative. When I first started looking at fire, I just found it incredibly motivating. It really actually encouraged me to do things like sort out my private pensions, start doing a cash flow forecast to really understand where my expenses were going, and all those other good things. So I'm hoping if somebody does start exploring fire as well, this is useful. Maybe you just wanted to see what my numbers were at the end. That's also fine. This is how they're currently looking, and we'll keep on top of this and measure it frequently. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. Remember, any likes will be a donation to the Hedgehog charity, so much appreciated. And if you enjoyed the content, please drop me a subscribe. Thanks very much, everyone.